If you are hearing my voice today, then something has already happened that I never believed could happen. My mother looked at me differently this morning. Not with disappointment, not with pride, not even with concern. She looked at me the way someone looks at another person when they have carried a secret for so long that keeping it has become heavier than telling it. She asked me to sit down. She didn't ask about work. She didn't ask about the companies everyone thinks define me. She didn't ask about the future everyone assumes I can build. She simply looked into my eyes and quietly said, "There is something you deserve to know about the woman you will one day love." Everything inside me stopped. There are moments when your entire future changes before another word is spoken. This was one of them. I almost told her not to continue because sometimes ignorance feels safer than truth. Sometimes uncertainty feels kinder than certainty. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever sensed that one sentence could rearrange every dream you have carefully protected? I have spent my entire life believing intelligence could solve almost everything. Complex systems, impossible engineering, problems that everyone else called unsolvable. But love has never obeyed equations. Love refuses to be optimized. Love doesn't care how disciplined you are. It doesn't negotiate with logic. It waits quietly until the exact moment you have convinced yourself you are completely in control. Then it reminds you that your heart has never signed that agreement. My mother knew that. She has watched me spend years building machines while quietly avoiding the one thing that could actually destroy me. Attachment, not failure, not bankruptcy, not public criticism, attachment. Because every ambitious person secretly believes they can survive losing money, losing status, losing recognition, but losing the one person who finally makes success feel unnecessary. That is a different kind of fear. Maybe you understand that fear better than I do. Maybe you've already lived through it. Maybe you're listening because somewhere inside you there is still one conversation you wish had ended differently. If that's true, please don't leave before I finish this. Because if you do, you may never hear the one sentence that completely changed how I understood the woman I hope to spend my life with. For years I imagined my future wife as someone extraordinary. Not because of beauty. Beauty fades into familiarity. Not because of perfection. Perfection makes people impossible to love honestly. I imagined someone who would still recognize me after every achievement had been stripped away. Someone who could sit beside me in complete silence without needing either of us to perform. Someone who would not fall in love with the headlines. Someone who would remain after the applause disappeared. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how difficult it is to trust that someone loves the person instead of the image? People assume visibility creates confidence. It doesn't. It creates suspicion. Every compliment becomes a question. Every smile becomes something you investigate. Every coincidence starts looking intentional. Eventually, you begin doubting kindness itself, and that is one of the loneliest places a human being can live. My mother watched me become that person. She never criticized me. She simply waited. Mothers understand timing better than anyone. She knew there would come a day when success could no longer distract me from loneliness. That day arrived today. She folded her hands together and asked me something I wasn't expecting. If she arrived tomorrow, would you recognize her? I answered immediately. Of course, she smiled. Not because I was right, because she knew I wasn't. That smile frightened me more than anything she had said. Confidence is dangerous when it hasn't been tested. She leaned back and quietly whispered, "No, you will probably walk right past her." Those words have echoed inside me ever since. Walk right past her, how? How could someone spend years praying for the right person only to miss her when she finally appears? Is that possible? Or does fear simply become so familiar that we mistake it for wisdom? Tell me honestly, if love finally knocked on your door today, would you open it immediately? Or would you first ask it to prove itself? Would your past protect you or imprison you? I used to think caution was maturity. Now I'm beginning to wonder whether caution sometimes disguises itself as emotional surrender. Maybe we don't lose love because it leaves. Maybe we lose it because we hesitate one moment too long. That possibility terrifies me. Not because I fear rejection, because I fear recognition arriving after opportunity has already disappeared. There is a difference, a painful difference. My mother could see that I was trying to solve her words like an engineering puzzle. She laughed softly. "You still think this is about finding the right woman? It isn't. It's about becoming the man she won't be afraid to trust. No investor has ever challenged me that deeply. No competitor has ever exposed my weakness so clearly. Because she wasn't questioning my success, she was questioning my emotional availability. There is a difference between providing safety and becoming safe. I had confused the two for years. Money creates comfort, presence creates peace. They are not the same. Neither are ambition and intimacy. One builds companies, the other builds homes. One attracts admiration, the other owns trust. I had mastered one. The other I wasn't even sure I understood. If these words are reaching you tonight, and something inside your heart feels strangely quiet, would you stay with me a little longer by subscribing? And before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. I wish I could tell you everything my mother revealed after that. I wish I could say the hardest part came next. It didn't. The hardest part was realizing she hadn't even started telling me the truth yet. And somehow, I already felt like the future I had imagined was beginning to disappear. I couldn't answer her, not because I disagreed, because something inside me had already begun falling apart. For years I believed that preparing for love meant preparing my life. Build stability, build discipline, build a future, build something worthy of sharing. But I had never stopped to ask whether I was building walls at the same speed. The room became impossibly quiet. My mother looked toward the window as though she was searching for memories instead of words. Then she said something I still hear every time the world becomes silent. You have spent your whole life learning how to protect your heart. She paused. But you never learned how to recognize someone who would never ask you to protect it. I lowered my eyes. That sentence landed somewhere much deeper than pride. It reached every excuse I had ever made, every delayed message, every conversation I convinced myself could wait until tomorrow, every moment I believed success had to come before intimacy. I suddenly wondered how many opportunities had disappeared while I was busy preparing for opportunities that never arrived. The strange thing about regret is that it rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as logic. It tells you that waiting is responsible, that caution is wisdom, that distance is maturity. Until one day you realize you weren't protecting your future, you were postponing your happiness. I wanted to argue, I wanted to explain that life had demanded sacrifices, that responsibility had required impossible choices, that every hour spent building something meaningful had been necessary. She listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, she smiled with heartbreaking kindness. You keep defending your schedule. I am asking about your heart. There was no answer to that. Because the truth was painfully simple. My calendar had become completely organized. My emotions had become completely unavailable. I remembered evenings when someone genuinely wanted to know how I was feeling. Instead of answering honestly, I redirected the conversation toward work, toward goals, toward future plans, toward anything except myself. Vulnerability had always felt inefficient. Now it felt expensive. The cost had been years of emotional distance I didn't even notice while it was happening. My mother stood and slowly walked toward an old cabinet. She opened one of the drawers and removed a small photograph. It had faded with time. The edges were worn. She handed it to me without saying a word. I looked at it for several seconds before realizing what I was seeing. It wasn't a remarkable picture, no celebration, no achievement, no ceremony. Just two ordinary people sitting beside each other on a bench. My parents, young, laughing, completely unaware that someone had captured one of the simplest moments of their lives. They had almost nothing, she whispered, but they never postponed loving each other until life became easier. I continued staring at the photograph. There was something almost unsettling about how peaceful they looked. Not because life had been perfect, because they had chosen each other before certainty arrived. I had spent years waiting for certainty. Maybe certainty was never coming. She sat beside me again. There was something else. Her voice became quieter than before, so quiet that I almost wished I couldn't hear it. You Clear's throat think your future wife will need your strength, she will. But one day she will need your weakness even more. I frowned. My weakness? That didn't make sense. Weakness had always been something to overcome, something to hide, something to repair before allowing another person close enough to see it. She gently shook her head as if reading every thought crossing my mind. A woman who truly loves you will eventually become exhausted if she only ever meets the version of you that survives. She deserves to meet the version that feels. That sentence dismantled years of carefully constructed armor. How many times had I mistaken emotional silence for emotional stability? How many people had concluded that I simply didn't need anyone? How many had quietly walked away because I never allowed them to carry even the smallest piece of my pain? Perhaps they weren't leaving because they lacked patience. Perhaps they were leaving because I never trusted them enough to stay. I closed my eyes. Memories began appearing one after another. Moments I had buried beneath accomplishment, people I admired but never pursued, conversations interrupted by ambition, promises delayed until circumstances improved. There was a pattern, one I had refused to acknowledge. Whenever love asked me to slow down, I accelerated. Whenever someone tried to understand me, I became difficult to understand. Whenever affection became real, I disappeared into work. It had never felt intentional, yet intention changes nothing when the result remains the same. My mother reached for my hand. I cannot remember the last time she had done that. You inherited many beautiful things, your determination, your curiosity, your refusal to give up, she smiled sadly. You also inherited your father's fear. I looked at her immediately. My father? She nodded. He believed losing someone would destroy him, so he never fully allowed himself to belong to anyone. The room suddenly felt smaller because I recognized that fear, not from stories, from myself. For years I believed I had invented it. Now I understood it had quietly traveled across generations. Fear has strange ways of surviving. Sometimes it doesn't live in words. Sometimes it lives in habits, in distance, in hesitation, in the inability to say simple things before it becomes too late. I finally asked the only thing that mattered, then how do I stop becoming him? She answered without hesitation. You stop treating love like a risk assessment. Those words remained suspended between us because that was exactly what I had been doing, evaluating compatibility, calculating outcomes, measuring probability, searching for guarantees. Love had become another project, another decision tree, another equation waiting to be solved. No wonder it always felt incomplete. Ben, she looked directly into my eyes, and everything changed. I haven't told you the real reason yet. My heartbeat became impossible to ignore. Every instinct told me the conversation had only now reached its true beginning. She continued, "There is something about the woman you will marry, something you would never discover on your own." I leaned forward. Every part of me wanted the answer. She remained silent. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, she whispered, "When you first meet her, you won't believe she is meant for you." I stared at her in disbelief. She nodded slowly. "You will convince yourself she belongs somewhere else. You will tell yourself she deserves someone softer, someone with fewer scars, someone whose life is easier to understand. And because of that, you will begin walking away before she ever asks you to stay." The air left my lungs. Not because I knew she was right, because somewhere deep inside me I recognized the possibility. The terrifying possibility that self-doubt can become more destructive than rejection itself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid that someone would stop loving me. I was afraid I might reject the very love I'd spent years hoping to find. That fear settled quietly inside me, and I had no idea that what my mother was about to reveal would force me to question every decision I believed I would one day make. I barely slept that night, not because I had received answers, because every answer had quietly become another question. The strange thing about truth is that it doesn't always comfort you. Sometimes it rearranges every certainty you have ever trusted. Morning arrived, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like I had awakened inside someone else's life. Every meeting on my calendar suddenly seemed smaller than the conversation that had taken place in my mother's living room. Numbers still mattered, deadlines still existed, people still expected decisions, but somewhere beneath all of it, another decision had begun demanding my attention. Would I continue living the way I always had, or would I finally become the man I kept expecting love to understand? For years I had believed the greatest danger in life was failure. Now I understood something far more frightening. Success can become a beautiful hiding place. People congratulate you while quietly overlooking how alone you have become. They celebrate your discipline. They admire your resilience. They envy your achievements. Very few ask whether your heart has forgotten how to rest. Mine had, not because it lacked love, because it had mistaken constant movement for purpose. Several days passed before I returned to see my mother. She was waiting for me before I knocked, almost as though she knew I hadn't come for advice. I had come for courage. She poured 2 cups of tea and smiled gently. "You've been thinking." I laughed softly. "I've been unraveling." She nodded. "That's usually how real change begins." I finally asked her the question I had avoided since the beginning. What was the truth? She remained silent for several moments, not because she wanted to create suspense, because some truth deserved to arrive slowly. Then she spoke. "When you were very young, you used to tell me that one day you would build something that changed the world. I remember. You also told me something else." I searched my memory. Nothing came. "You said that if you ever met the woman you loved, you hoped she would never have to compete with your dreams." A faint smile appeared on my face. "I actually said that?" "You did." Her eyes became filled with emotion. "Somewhere along the way, you forgot." The words settled over me like rain after years of drought. She was right. Without realizing it, I had turned my dreams into a place no one else could enter. Not intentionally, gradually. Every postponed dinner, every canceled weekend, every promise of after this project, every moment I expected understanding instead of offering presents. Love had never asked me to abandon my purpose. It had only asked not to be treated as an interruption. I had misunderstood the assignment. I thought greatness demanded sacrifice. It does, but I had been sacrificing the wrong things. The most painful realization wasn't that I had worked too hard. It was that I had quietly accepted the lie that meaningful work and meaningful love could not exist together. My mother looked directly at me. "The woman you marry won't rescue you. She won't complete you. She won't erase your scars. She will simply refuse to let you carry them alone." I felt my eyes fill with tears. Not dramatic tears, the quiet kind that appear when your soul recognizes something before your mind does. For years I had imagined love as finding someone extraordinary. Now I understood. Real love is meeting someone who quietly makes honesty feel safer than pretending. Weeks later, life placed someone in front of me. She wasn't what I had imagined. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't seem interested in status. She listened more than she spoke. She noticed things everyone else overlooked. She wasn't fascinated by my accomplishments. She was curious about my silence. That frightened me because silence had always been the place where I hid. The more we spoke, the more I wanted to retreat. Old habits returned. I answered messages later than I should have. I buried myself in work. I convinced myself she deserved someone simpler, someone less complicated, someone who had already learned the lessons I was still struggling to understand. Then came the moment that nearly changed everything. Someone else entered my life. On paper, she seemed perfect. Everything looked effortless. Every conversation was easy. Every expectation aligned. No emotional risk. No uncomfortable honesty. No vulnerability. Just comfort. For a brief moment, I almost convinced myself that comfort was love. It would have been the easiest decision, the safest decision, the wrong decision, because comfort had never asked me to grow. It had only asked me to remain unchanged. One evening, I found myself holding my phone, preparing to send a message that would quietly close the door on the woman who had begun reaching my heart. My finger hovered over the screen. I told myself it was practical, responsible, reasonable. Then I remembered my mother's words. You will begin walking away before she ever asks you to stay. Everything inside me froze. I realized I wasn't protecting either of us. I was protecting the familiar version of myself who believed distance was safer than disappointment. I put the phone down. Instead of ending the story, I finally told the truth. Not the polished version, not the impressive version, the frightened version. I admitted that I was afraid. Afraid that one day she would discover I wasn't as strong as everyone believed. Afraid that ambition had made me emotionally late to my own life. Afraid that she deserved someone who didn't need to learn how to be present. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she smiled with tears in her eyes. Then she said something I will remember for the rest of my life. I wasn't waiting for a perfect man. I was waiting for an honest one. In that moment, I understood what my mother had been trying to tell me from the beginning. The truth about the woman I would love was never really about her. It was about me. She knew I would eventually meet someone capable of loving me deeply. The real danger was that the frightened version of myself might reject that love before the healed version ever had the chance to receive it. My mother had never been warning me about the wrong woman. She had been warning me about the wrong version of myself. That was the truth. Not a secret about her past, not a prophecy, not a hidden test. A mirror. The greatest threat to my future was never another person. It was every fearful decision I almost justified in the name of self-protection. Love did not enter my life because I finally became fearless. It entered because I finally stopped demanding guarantees. I discovered that mature love is not built on certainty. It is built on choosing each other on ordinary mornings, on difficult conversations, on forgiveness offered before pride asks for permission, on showing up even when life is loud, on believing that two imperfect people can become a place of peace for one another. If this confession reaches you at the moment you needed it most, I hope you remember one thing. Do not let old fears make decisions that your future heart will spend years trying to undo. The future is not built by perfect people. It is built by people who are willing to love honestly before certainty arrives. This is a reminder from someone who finally understood that the greatest innovations are not always made in laboratories or companies. Sometimes they are made quietly between two people who decide that fear will no longer write the ending of their story. If you've stayed with me until this moment, then maybe the story was never really about me. Maybe it was about you. Maybe somewhere along the way, you remembered someone you never stopped loving. Maybe you realized that fear has been making decisions your heart never agreed to.